In this gripping cheating wife story, a devoted husband's seemingly perfect marriage shatters when he discovers his wife's secret affair with a manipulative fraudster. What starts as heartbreak escalates into a fierce custody battle and a high-stakes legal drama, with devastating revelations and shocking twists at every turn. As the betrayal unfolds, he must confront unimaginable challenges, protect his children, and navigate a storm of deceit, resilience, and redemption. Will he find justice and rebuild his life? Or will the weight of betrayal destroy everything he holds dear? Watch to uncover the dramatic twists in this unforgettable story. Meet me, Matthew Carter. 37 years old, a high school history teacher, and, for lack of a better term, an optimist. I believed in the good in people, in the power of commitment, and in the sanctity of family. I wasn't rich or particularly ambitious, but I was content, or at least I convinced myself I was. Then there was my wife, Danielle, 35, beautiful in a way that could stop traffic, with long chestnut hair and sharp green eyes that always seemed to hold a secret. Danielle had a charm about her that made people gravitate toward her. She was the social one, the life of every party, the kind of person who made friends effortlessly. I often joked that I didn't need to have many friends, because Danielle knew everyone, and through her, I did too. We had been married for 13 years and had 2 kids. Emma, our spunky 11-year-old with a love for art, and Jake, a quiet 8-year-old who could spend hours building elaborate Lego creations together. We lived in a house I'd inherited from my parents, a cozy place filled with memories. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was ours. Life was normal. I taught classes during the day, coached the debate team in the evenings, and spent weekends mowing the lawn or helping Jake with his latest creation. Danielle worked part-time as an event planner, a job that fit her personality like a glove. It gave her flexibility and plenty of opportunities to meet new people, which she loved. In hindsight, maybe a little too much. It all started with a party. Not just any party, though. Our anniversary party. Danielle had planned it herself. Naturally. She said it was a way to celebrate our love with the people who mattered most. She booked a local venue, sent out beautifully crafted invitations, and even hired a live band. It was extravagant, sure, but I didn't question it. That was just Danielle, always going above and beyond. The night was a blur of laughter, clinking glasses, and congratulations. I spent most of it greeting old friends and colleagues, while Danielle flitted around the room, dazzling everyone she spoke to. I remember thinking how lucky I was, watching her from across the room as she laughed at something one of her friends had said. I didn't realize then that the man she was laughing with, Michael Reed, would soon change everything. Michael was new to town, the owner of a growing real estate firm. Tall, charismatic, with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was the kind of guy who turned heads when he walked into a room, and Danielle, it seemed, was no exception. I didn't think much of it at the time. Why would I? Danielle and I had been through so much together. We were solid, or so I thought. As the weeks passed, Michael's name started coming up more often. Danielle mentioned him casually at first. A new client she was working with on an upcoming event. He's a perfectionist, she said with a laugh one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner. Wants everything to be just right. It's a little annoying, but hey, it's good business. I nodded, distracted by Jake, who was showing me his latest Lego masterpiece. If only I'd paid more attention then. Over time, though, I noticed small changes. Danielle started dressing up more for her meetings. She spent more time on her hair and makeup, more time picking out outfits. She said it was just part of the job, but it felt different. Then there were the late nights. She claimed they were because of last-minute event details or demanding clients. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her. At first. The turning point came one Sunday afternoon. It was a lazy day, the kind where we usually stayed in our pajamas until noon. Danielle, however, was unusually restless. She spent most of the morning pacing around the kitchen, her phone glued to her hand. At one point, she grabbed her keys and said she needed to run out for a bit. "Client emergency," she said, flashing me a tight smile. It was odd Danielle never worked on Sundays, claiming it was her one day to disconnect. I didn't press her, though maybe I should have. Hours later, she came home, looking flustered and tired. When I asked how it went, she brushed me off, saying it wasn't a big deal. That night, after Danielle had gone to bed, I noticed her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. A text from Michael popped up on the screen. "Thanks for today. You're amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My heart sank. I didn't confront her right away. I needed to be sure. Needed more than a single text to prove my growing suspicions. So, I waited. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention. I noticed the way her mood seemed to lift. Whenever she got a text or call from Michael, I noticed how she started spending more time at the gym, more time away from home. And then there were the nights when she came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. The final straw came one Friday evening. Danielle had told me she was going out with friends. A girls' night, she called it. She left around 7, dressed to the nines in a little black dress I hadn't seen in years. Something didn't sit right with me. After she left, I called her best friend, Lisa, under the guise of asking if they'd be home late. Lisa sounded confused. "What are you talking about?" Danielle said she was staying in tonight. My chest tightened. I felt a mixture of anger, fear, and heartbreak. All at once I hung up the phone and sat in silence for what felt like hours, trying to decide what to do. Finally, I grabbed my coat and keys. If Danielle wasn't with Lisa, I was going to find out where she was. It didn't take long. Danielle wasn't exactly subtle. Her car was parked outside a downtown hotel, and through the lobby's glass doors, I saw her standing by the elevator with Michael. They were laughing, their heads close together. As the elevator doors closed behind them, I felt something inside me shatter. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? Was I to blame? Could I have stopped it? By the time Danielle came home, hours later, I was sitting in the living room, waiting. She looked surprised to see me still awake. "You're up late," she said, her voice casual, like nothing had happened. I didn't say anything at first, just stared at her, trying to see her the way I used to. The woman I'd loved for 13 years. But all I saw was a stranger. "Who is he?" I finally asked. Danielle froze, her eyes widening for a split second before she recovered. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. Danielle Michael. I saw you at the hotel tonight." She stared at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, might try to gaslight me into thinking I'd imagined it all. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's not what you think," she said, the words hollow and rehearsed. I stood up, my hands shaking. "Then tell me what it is. Tell me how long this has been going on." Danielle didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed the room and sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wouldn't even look at me, and for a moment, I wondered if she would try to lie her way out of it. Then she took a deep breath and said, "It's complicated." I felt my chest tighten. "Complicated, Danielle? You're sneaking around with another man. What exactly is complicated about that?" Her head snapped up, anger flashing in her eyes. "You don't get it, Matt. You don't know what it's like to feel invisible." "Invisible?" My voice rose, the disbelief and anger bubbling up like lava. "How could you feel invisible? You have everything you've ever wanted. Our home, our kids, a husband who's done nothing but love and support you." Her gaze softened, almost like she pitied me. "It's not about you. This, this thing with Michael, it's not because of anything you did or didn't do. It's because of me. I feel like I've lost myself in this life we built. The parties, the PTA meetings, the endless routines. I don't even recognize who I am anymore. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't that I didn't understand what she was saying. I did. Marriage and parenting weren't easy, and sometimes they consumed you. But the idea that she'd chosen Michael, of all people, as her way of finding herself was a betrayal I couldn't process. So this is your solution to destroy our family, to destroy me. My voice cracked, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. Danielle didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was low, almost apologetic. I didn't plan for this to happen. I didn't mean for it to get this far. But Michael, he makes me feel alive again. I stared at her, struggling to reconcile the woman I married with the stranger sitting before me. And what about us? What about the kids? Did you think about them before you ran off to that hotel? She flinched at that, finally showing some semblance of guilt. Of course I thought about them. I think about them every day. But Matt, I don't know how to fix this. Those words hung in the air like a thick fog. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Danielle wasn't even fighting for us, for our marriage. She had already decided we were broken. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Danielle and I barely spoke. Except when it came to the kids, I found myself analyzing every word, every glance, every moment, searching for signs of the woman I thought I knew. But each day that passed made it clearer. Danielle had already checked out. Emma and Jake could sense something was wrong. Kids are more intuitive than we give them credit for. Emma started spending more time in her room. While Jake clung to me like a lifeline, I did my best to shield them from the growing tension, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a bucket. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about Michael. The more I thought about him, the angrier I became. He wasn't just some faceless fling. He was a real, tangible threat to my family. And the worst part, he didn't seem to care about the destruction he was causing. I started looking into him. It wasn't hard. Michael was a public figure in Chestnut Ridge, known for his real estate empire and high-profile connections. A few online searches revealed that he wasn't exactly squeaky clean. There were whispers of shady deals, rumors about his temper, and more than one ex-girlfriend who had hinted at his manipulative nature. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, I stumbled across an article about Michael's business dealings. It was from a few years ago, detailing a lawsuit filed against him by a former partner. The partner claimed Michael had sabotaged their joint venture to take control of the company, using threats and deceit to get his way. The case had been settled out of court, but the story left a bad taste in my mouth. I started to wonder, was Michael doing the same thing to my family? Was he using Danielle's insecurities to manipulate her? The thought fueled a fire inside me. I couldn't let this man win. I couldn't let him take everything from me. One night, I made a decision I wasn't going to sit back and watch my life fall apart. I needed answers. And if Danielle wasn't going to give them to me, I'd find them myself. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. She told me she was going out to meet a client for drinks. The old me would have taken her at her word, but not anymore. I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and followed her car at a safe distance. My heart pounded as I watched her pull into a restaurant parking lot. She stepped out of the car, and moments later, Michael appeared. They walked inside together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I parked my car and sat there for what felt like an eternity, debating my next move. Part of me wanted to burst in and confront them, to make a scene that neither of them would forget. But another part of me, one I barely recognized, wanted to gather evidence. Cold, hard proof that I could use to protect myself and my kids. I opted for the latter. Pulling out my phone, I snapped a few pictures of them through the window. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I drove home that night, I felt a strange sense of control. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting, I was taking action. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. Her name was Sarah Monroe, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom. I showed her the pictures and explained the situation. She listened carefully, asking pointed questions and taking detailed notes. "Do you want a divorce?" she asked bluntly. I hesitated. "I don't know, part of me wants to fight for my marriage, but I don't think Danielle does." Sarah nodded. "If that's the case, my advice is to protect yourself. Get financial records, document everything, and don't let her intimidate you. If this goes to court, you'll need to show that you're the stable parent, the one who's been putting the kids first." Her words hit me like a wake-up call. For so long, I'd been focused on Danielle and Michael, trying to make sense of their actions. But Sarah was right. It wasn't just about them. It was about Emma and Jake, about their future and mine. I spent the next few weeks quietly building my case. I dug through bank statements, text messages, and anything else that could paint a clear picture of what was happening. I even installed a small camera in the living room to capture any late-night calls or arguments. All the while, I tried to be the best dad I could be. I helped Emma with her art projects, played catch with Jake in the backyard, and read bedtime stories every night. Those moments reminded me why I was fighting so hard, because my kids deserved better than this chaos. And that's where I'll leave it for now. If you've ever been in a situation like this, or know someone who has, you know how hard it can be. Life doesn't come with easy answers, but sometimes the only way to move forward is to take control of your own story. If you're enjoying this journey and want to hear how it all unfolds, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for the next chapter. Danielle's behavior became more erratic as the weeks passed. She was spending more time away from home, her excuses growing thinner each time. Meanwhile, I threw myself into gathering every piece of evidence I could. My kids were my anchor, and every time I thought about them being caught in the crossfire, my resolve hardened. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, I was fighting for them. One evening, as I was tucking Jake into bed, he asked a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Dad, why is Mom always so busy? Does she not like being home anymore?" I forced a smile and ruffled his hair. "Mom's just got a lot on her plate right now, buddy, but she loves you and Emma very much." Jake nodded, but the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I couldn't let this go on. The time for quietly gathering evidence was over. It was time to confront Danielle and Michael head-on. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Danielle had mentioned she'd be working late at an event planning meeting. It was a flimsy excuse, and I knew exactly where she would be. I followed her car to the same downtown hotel where I'd seen her with Michael before. But this time, I wasn't just going to sit in the parking lot. I waited until she and Michael disappeared into the elevator before stepping into the lobby. The receptionist looked up as I approached the desk. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm looking for my wife, Danielle Carter. I believe she checked in earlier this evening." The receptionist hesitated, her eyes darting to the screen in front of her. "I'm sorry, but I can't release that information." I nodded, already prepared for this. "That's fine. I just want to leave something for her. Could you tell me which room to deliver it to?" It was a long shot, but to my surprise, she relented. "Room 417, she said, her voice low. "But please don't cause a scene." I thanked her and made my way to the elevator, my heart pounding. As I stood in the hallway outside room 417, I hesitated. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for all at once. I raised my hand and knocked. The door opened, and there he was. Michael, dressed in a crisp shirt and slacks, his expression shifting from surprise to smugness as he recognized me. "Well, if it isn't the husband," he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "What brings you here, Matt?" "I want to talk to my wife," I said, my voice cold. "Is she here?" Michael smirked. "She's a little busy right now, but I'm sure she wouldn't mind seeing you." Before I could respond, Danielle appeared behind him, her face pale. "Matt, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I think the better question is, what are you doing here, Danielle?" Michael stepped aside, clearly enjoying the unfolding drama. "I'll let you two talk," he said, his tone dripping with mock civility. Danielle crossed her arms, refusing to meet my gaze. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said finally. "Find out what?" I demanded. "That you've been sneaking around with this guy, that you've been lying to me, to our kids." She flinched at that, but her expression hardened. "Matt, I told you. I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time. And Michael, he understands me in a way you never did." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So what's the plan, Danielle? Are you going to leave me? Leave the kids?" She hesitated, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. But then Michael spoke up from the background. "Maybe it's time you accepted that this marriage is over. Matt, Danielle deserves to be with someone who actually makes her happy." I turned to him, my hands clenched into fists. "Stay out of this. This isn't your family." Michael's smirk faltered, but before he could respond, Danielle stepped between us. "Stop it, both of you. This is exactly why I can't do this anymore." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, none of us spoke. Finally, I turned and walked away, my heart pounding with anger and despair. Back at home, I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark living room, replaying the confrontation in my mind. I'd tried to hold it together for so long, but now everything felt like it was crumbling. Danielle's betrayal, Michael's smug arrogance. It was too much to bear. The next morning, I called Sarah, my lawyer. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's do this." Sarah didn't sugarcoat things. "It's going to get messy, Matt. Are you prepared for that?" "I don't have a choice," I said. "I need to protect my kids." And so, the legal battle began. Danielle was furious when she was served with divorce papers, and things between us went from tense to downright hostile. She accused me of trying to take the kids away from her, while I argued that her affair made her an unfit parent. The truth was, I just wanted stability for Emma and Jake. But Danielle and Michael weren't going to make it easy. As the court date approached, the tension reached a boiling point. Danielle started spreading rumors about me, painting me as an absentee father who was more concerned with work than his family. It was a low blow, but I refused to stoop to her level. Instead, I focused on gathering more evidence and working with Sarah to build a solid case. One night, as I was reviewing documents in the kitchen, Emma came downstairs. "Dad, are you and Mum getting a divorce?" I froze, caught off guard by her question. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "Because you're always fighting, and Mum said something about moving." My heart broke as I pulled her into a hug. "Emma, listen to me. Your mom and we're going through a tough time right now. But no matter what happens, we both love you and Jake more than anything." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. It was in that moment that I realized just how much was at stake. This wasn't just about me or Danielle. It was about giving my kids the stability they deserved. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with Sarah by my side. Danielle was already there, sitting next to her lawyer, and Michael. He shot me a smug grin as I took my seat, but I refused to let him rattle me. This wasn't about him. This was about my family. The hearing was intense, with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence. Sarah was relentless, painting a clear picture of Danielle's infidelity and its impact on our family. Danielle's lawyer tried to counter, claiming that I was too focused on work to be an attentive parent. But in the end, the judge sided with me, granting me primary custody of Emma and Jake. As the decision was announced, I felt a mix of relief and sadness I had won the battle. But the war wasn't over. Danielle was still a part of our lives, and co-parenting with her was going to be a challenge. But for now, I could breathe a little easier, knowing that my kids were safe. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I started seeing a therapist to work through the anger and resentment I felt toward Danielle and Michael. I also made an effort to spend more quality time with Emma and Jake, creating new routines and traditions to help them adjust. Danielle, meanwhile, seemed to grow more distant. She moved in with Michael, but from what I heard through mutual friends, their relationship wasn't as perfect as she had claimed. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly, I just felt sorry for her. She had thrown away everything we had built for a fleeting sense of happiness, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just break hearts. It breaks trust, relationships, and sometimes, even people. But if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that healing is possible. It takes time, patience, and a lot of hard work, but it can be done. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with me through this journey. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world to me. The courtroom victory gave me a brief moment of peace, but it was fleeting. Winning custody of Emma and Jake was just one step in what was becoming an unrelenting battle. Danielle, backed by Michael, was determined to claw her way back into control, and her tactics grew bolder. Every week seemed to bring a new accusation or a calculated move designed to undermine me. One Friday evening, just as I was finishing dinner with the kids, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Matt, we've got a problem," she said, her tone serious. "Danielle has filed a motion to appeal the custody ruling." I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone tightly. "On what grounds?" "She's claiming you're creating a toxic environment for the children. She says the stress of the custody arrangement is negatively affecting them." I felt my stomach drop. "That's ridiculous. I've done nothing but prioritize their well-being." "I know," Sarah said, "but we need to take this seriously. It means another court battle." After I hung up, I stared at the table, lost in thought. Emma and Jake were watching me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "Everything okay, Dad?" Emma asked. I forced a smile, not wanting them to worry. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just grown-up stuff." But it wasn't fine. Danielle's appeal wasn't just an attack on my parenting. It was an attempt to destabilize everything I had fought so hard to protect. The weeks leading up to the appeal hearing were a blur of preparation and stress. Sarah and I worked tirelessly to counter Danielle's claims, gathering testimonies from teachers, neighbors, and even Jake's pediatrician to prove that the kids were thriving under my care. Meanwhile, Danielle ramped up her campaign. One afternoon, I arrived home to find Michael's car parked outside. He was leaning casually against the hood, waiting for me. "Michael," I said, stepping out of my car, "what are you doing here?" He smirked, his confidence as irritating as ever. "Just thought we should talk, man to man." I crossed my arms, keeping my voice steady. "There's nothing to talk about." "Sure there is," he said, stepping closer. "Look, I get it. You're angry your wife left you for someone better." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You don't know anything about me or my family." Michael's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Here's the thing. Matt, Danielle, and I are prepared to fight for what's best for the kids. And let's face it, You can't offer them what we can. Stability, opportunities. Stability? I cut him off, taking a step forward. You think parading around as some hero while tearing apart their lives is stability? You're nothing but a parasite, feeding off other people's pain. Michael's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, I walked past him and into the house, slamming the door behind me. The day of the appeal hearing arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Danielle's lawyer painted a picture of me as a man overwhelmed by the pressures of single parenthood, claiming that the children would be better off in Danielle's care, supported by her strong partnership with Michael. Sarah, as always, was a force to be reckoned with. She presented evidence of the children's progress since the initial ruling, highlighting their improved grades, happier dispositions, and stronger routines. But it was Emma's testimony that proved to be the turning point. When asked by the judge about her living situation, Emma spoke with a maturity that took my breath away. I love both my parents, she said, her voice steady. But I feel safe with my dad. He listens to me and Jake. He's always there for us. Danielle shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while Michael stared at Emma, his expression unreadable. The judge nodded thoughtfully, and I felt a glimmer of hope. When the ruling came, it was clear that Danielle's appeal had backfired. The judge upheld the original custody arrangement, citing the children's well-being as the deciding factor. As we left the courtroom, Danielle's face was a mix of anger and defeat. Michael tried to comfort her, but she shrugged him off. For the first time, I saw cracks in their united front. In the days that followed, things began to settle. Danielle seemed to retreat, her attempts to challenge me growing less frequent. Michael, too, became a less prominent figure, his arrogance giving way to an uneasy silence. But the peace didn't last long. One evening, as I was helping Jake with his homework, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "You need to see this attached" was a link to a news article. I clicked it, and my stomach dropped. The headline read, "Local real estate mogul investigated for fraud." The article detailed allegations against Michael, accusing him of embezzling funds and falsifying documents in several high-profile deals. It was exactly the kind of scandal that could bring his empire crashing down. For a moment, I felt a surge of vindication. Michael's arrogance had finally caught up with him. But then, I thought about Danielle. How would this affect her? And, more importantly, how would it affect the kids? The fallout was swift. Michael's name was dragged through the mud in the media, and his once confident demeanor crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. Danielle, who had tied herself so closely to him, was caught in the crossfire. She showed up at my door one afternoon, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her. "Matt, can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, but eventually stepped aside to let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the tension between us thick. "I made a mistake," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought Michael was the answer to everything I was missing, but he's not. He's ruined me, Matt." I didn't respond right away, unsure of what to say. Finally, I asked, "What do you want from me, Danielle?" She looked at me, her expression pleading. "I just want to fix things for the kids, for us." I shook my head. "You don't get to walk back into our lives like nothing happened. The damage is done, Danielle. The trust is gone." Her tears spilled over, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Instead, I felt a deep sadness for what we had lost, and for what could never be repaired. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the battles, the pain. It had all brought me to this moment. And while I couldn't erase the scars, I realized that I had come out stronger. Emma and Jake were my focus now. They were my reason for fighting, my reason for moving forward. And as I tucked them into bed, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them together. If you've been following this story, I hope it's reminded you of the importance of family, resilience, and standing up for what matters. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. For more stories like this, your support means everything. Michael's scandal sent shockwaves through the community, and its impact rippled into every corner of Danielle's life. It wasn't long before whispers turned into open judgment. Friends who once admired her for her bold choices now looked at her with thinly veiled pity. She became a fixture of gossip, a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition blinds you to consequence. For me, the fallout presented an opportunity. With Michael's empire crumbling and Danielle's reputation in tatters, the power dynamic had shifted. For the first time in months, I felt like I was no longer on the defensive, but even as I savored this small victory, I couldn't ignore the mounting tension in the background. Late one night, I was going over the week's schedule when my phone rang. It was Sarah, and her tone was unusually grave. "Matt, we need to talk." "Is this about Michael?" I asked, already bracing for bad news. "Partially," she replied. "Danielle's filed another motion this time. She's requesting joint custody." I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table. Joint custody? After everything she's done? Sarah didn't sugarcoat it. Her argument is that the kids need both parents in their lives, especially now that Michael's influence is diminished. She's claiming she's willing to prioritize their well-being. "And you believe her?" I asked, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Sarah sighed. "It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is how this looks to a judge. If Danielle can prove she's made meaningful changes, we could face an uphill battle." Her words left me restless, my mind racing with possibilities. Could Danielle really convince the court she deserved a second chance? And if so, how would it affect Emma and Jake? The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and rising tension. Danielle seemed determined to prove she was a changed woman, suddenly attending PTA meetings, volunteering at the kids' school, and even organizing a charity event. It was a transparent attempt to rebuild her image. But I had to admit, it was working. Emma and Jake started asking more questions about their mother, clearly torn between their love for her and their loyalty to me. I did my best to reassure them, but the uncertainty weighed heavily on all of us. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was charged with a sense of finality. Danielle's lawyer presented her case with precision, highlighting her recent efforts to reconnect with the children and distance herself from Michael. They even brought in character witnesses, former friends and colleagues, who testified to her determination to turn her life around. When it was my turn, Sarah was relentless. She detailed Danielle's history of betrayal and instability, painting a clear picture of the chaos she had brought into our lives. But the most powerful moment came when Sarah asked me to speak directly to the judge. I stood, my palms sweating as I faced the bench. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'm not here to vilify Danielle. She's the mother of my children, and I'll always want what's best for them. But what's best for them is stability, consistency, and a home where they feel safe. I've worked tirelessly to provide that for Emma and Jake, and I believe they deserve to continue living in an environment that prioritizes their well-being." As I sat down, I glanced at Danielle. For the first time, she looked genuinely remorseful. It was a fleeting moment, but it stayed with me. The judge took a week to deliberate, and those 7 days felt like an eternity. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the gnawing uncertainty. But the tension was ever present, a constant reminder of what was at stake. When the decision finally came, it was a bittersweet victory. The judge ruled to maintain the current custody arrangement, but with provisions for supervised visitation for Danielle. It wasn't the clean break I'd hoped for, but it was enough to protect the stability I had fought so hard to create. In the aftermath, Danielle seemed resigned to her new reality. Her visits with the kids were civil, even pleasant at times. But there was a distance between us that would never be bridged. Michael, meanwhile, disappeared from the picture entirely. His once prominent presence reduced to a cautionary footnote in the town's history. Life slowly began to normalize. Emma threw herself into her art, creating vibrant paintings that filled our home with color. Jake found solace in building even more intricate Lego creations, his imagination seemingly boundless. And me, I found peace in the quiet moments, reading bedtime stories, sharing meals, and knowing that I had done everything in my power to protect my family. One evening, as the kids were finishing their homework, Emma approached me with a small canvas in her hands. "Dad, I made this for you," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. I took the painting and felt my throat tighten. It was a simple yet powerful image of our family, me, Emma, and Jake, standing together under a bright blue sky. In the corner, she had written 3 words: "We are strong." Tears filled my eyes as I pulled her into a hug. "Thank you, sweetheart. This is perfect." In that moment, I realized something important. The journey had been painful, and the scars would always remain, but we had emerged stronger, closer, and more resilient than ever. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew we would face them together. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Your support means the world to me, and together, we can continue sharing these journeys of resilience, redemption, and hope. As the dust settled after the custody ruling, I should have felt a sense of relief. But instead, there was an uneasy calm, a feeling that the storm wasn't quite over. Danielle had accepted the judge's decision with surprising grace, but I knew her well enough to recognize that she wasn't done fighting. Then came the phone call. It was late on a Wednesday evening, and I had just finished reading Jake his favorite bedtime story. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and I saw an unfamiliar number on the screen. Hesitating for only a moment, I answered. "Matt Carter." The voice was male, clipped, and formal. "Yes, this is Matt. This is Detective Harris with the Chestnut Ridge Police Department. I'm calling regarding an investigation involving Michael Reed." My breath caught. Michael hadn't been on my radar since the custody battle ended. "What kind of investigation?" I asked, gripping the counter for support. "There's been a new development in the fraud case against him. We believe your ex-wife, Danielle Carter, may have been complicit in some of his activities. We'd like to ask you a few questions." I sank into a chair, my mind racing Danielle, involved in Michael's schemes. It was almost too much to process. "Of course," I managed to say. "When would you like to meet?" The meeting with Detective Harris the following day was eye-opening. He laid out the details. Michael's fraudulent activities had been extensive, involving shell companies, fake investments, and elaborate cover-ups. And while Danielle hadn't been a primary player, there was evidence suggesting she had helped him funnel money through her event planning business. "Do you believe she knew what she was doing?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around it. Harris shrugged. "It's hard to say. She might claim she was just following Michael's instructions without understanding the full scope, but the paper trail makes it clear she was involved." I left the police station feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and a strange sense of vindication. Danielle's choices had not only shattered our family, but had now dragged her into a criminal investigation. And yet, I couldn't shake the worry about how this would affect Emma and Jake. That evening, I called Danielle. She picked up on the second ring, her voice tense. "Matt, I don't have time for this." "You need to listen," I interrupted, my tone firm. "The police contacted me today. They're investigating you, Danielle. They have evidence tying you to Michael's fraud." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. I didn't know, Matt. I swear, I didn't know what he was doing. I wanted to believe her. For the sake of the woman I had once loved, for the sake of my children, I wanted to believe she had been an unwitting pawn in Michael's schemes. But the evidence said otherwise. Danielle, you need to come clean, I said. For your own sake, and for the kids. Don't let this drag on any longer than it has to. She didn't respond, and I eventually hung up, unsure if she would take my advice. The following week was a whirlwind. News of Danielle's involvement in the fraud case spread quickly, and the town that had once celebrated her as a social butterfly now whispered behind her back. Emma and Jake started coming home with questions about what they were hearing at school, and I did my best to shield them from the harsh realities. One night, Emma confronted me in the living room. Dad, is Mom in trouble? She asked, her eyes filled with worry. I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. Your mom is dealing with some tough stuff right now, I said carefully. But no matter what happens, she loves you and Jake very much. Emma nodded, but I could see the weight of it all bearing down on her. It broke my heart to see her innocence slipping away. Then came the turning point. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I received a call from Sarah. Her tone was urgent. Matt, you're going to want to sit down for this. What's going on? I asked, my heart pounding. Danielle has been arrested. I sank into a chair. Stunned, Sarah explained that Danielle had turned herself in after striking a deal with the prosecutors. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she had agreed to testify against Michael and provide full transparency about her role in the fraud. She's cooperating, Sarah said. That's the good news. The bad news is this could get messy. The media is already running with the story. Messy didn't even begin to cover it. The days that followed were a blur of headlines, whispered conversations, and difficult questions from Emma and Jake. Danielle's arrest was the final nail in the coffin of her reputation, and it left me scrambling to pick up the pieces for our kids. Despite everything, I decided to visit Danielle in custody. I needed answers, not just for myself, but for Emma and Jake. When I walked into the sterile visitation room and saw her sitting on the other side of the glass, she looked like a shadow of her former self. Matt, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why? I asked, cutting straight to the heart of it. Why did you let it get this far? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know how to stop it, Michael. He made it all seem so easy, so harmless. By the time I realized what was really happening, it was too late. I wanted to be angry, to lash out at her for the choices that had torn our family apart. But as I looked at her, I saw a broken woman, someone who had lost everything because of her own poor decisions. What happens now? I asked, my tone softer. I testify, she said. And then I serve my sentence. I don't know how long it'll be, but I'll get through it. I have to. For the kids. For the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had once loved. It wasn't enough to erase the damage, but it was a start. As Danielle's trial loomed, I focused on creating as much stability as possible for Emma and Jake. I leaned on friends, family, and even a counselor to help them navigate the emotional fallout. Slowly but surely, we began to find a new rhythm. Then came the day of Danielle's testimony. I didn't attend the trial, but I followed the updates closely. She spoke candidly about her role in Michael's schemes, admitting her mistakes and taking responsibility for her actions. Her testimony was instrumental in securing Michael's conviction, and while it didn't absolve her, it showed a willingness to change. In the end, Danielle was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. It was a heavy blow, but one she accepted with surprising grace. Before she left, we had one final conversation. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, her voice trembling. But I hope someday Emma and Jake will understand that I'm trying to make things right. I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. As much as I wanted to hate her, I couldn't. She was the mother of my children, and despite everything, I wanted her to succeed, for their sake. Life after Danielle's sentencing was far from easy, but it was a fresh start. I threw myself into being the best father I could be, cherishing every moment with Emma and Jake. Together, we began to rebuild, piece by piece. And while the scars of the past would always remain, they served as a reminder of the resilience we had found in the face of adversity. Thank you for following this journey. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and redemption. Your support makes all the difference. Danielle's arrest and subsequent cooperation with authorities created a ripple effect that no one in our lives could ignore. Emma and Jake were shielded from the full details, but the whispers in our small town were impossible to avoid. For weeks, I focused on helping them navigate the minefield of emotions they were experiencing. Meanwhile, the storm around Danielle and Michael reached its peak. The trial against Michael Reed was more sensational than anyone had anticipated. With Danielle's testimony as the linchpin, prosecutors built a case that unraveled years of deceit and corruption. The media frenzy was relentless, and every new headline felt like reopening an old wound. But as painful as it was, there was a grim satisfaction in seeing Michael finally face justice. It was during this time that something unexpected happened. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, helping Jake with a particularly challenging math assignment, when Emma walked in, holding a folded piece of paper. "Dad, can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice unusually hesitant. I nodded, setting Jake's workbook aside. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She handed me the paper, her eyes downcast. As I unfolded it, I realized it was a letter Danielle had written to Emma, pouring her heart out in an attempt to explain her actions and ask for forgiveness. Emma watched me carefully, her expression a mix of confusion and sadness. "What do you think, Dad?" she asked quietly. I took a deep breath, considering my response. "I think your mom is trying to make amends in the best way she knows how. It doesn't erase what she did, but it shows she's willing to take responsibility." Emma nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "Do you think I should write back?" "That's up to you, sweetheart," I said gently. "If you feel ready, it could be a good step toward healing. But if you're not, that's okay too." She hugged me tightly, and in that moment, I realized just how much weight she had been carrying. Danielle's mistakes had left deep scars, but Emma's resilience was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Meanwhile, the trial against Michael Reed was reaching its climax. Danielle's testimony had been damning, but the defense was doing everything in its power to discredit her. They painted her as a willing participant, someone who had benefited from Michael's schemes and only turned on him to save herself. Watching it unfold from a distance was infuriating. Despite everything Danielle had done, I knew she wasn't the mastermind behind Michael's crimes. She had been swept up in his charisma and promises, blinded by the allure of something new and exciting. It didn't excuse her actions, but it put them into perspective. The prosecution, however, was relentless. They presented evidence that left no doubt about Michael's guilt. Bank records, forged documents, and even testimony from former employees who had been coerced into silence. By the time closing arguments began, it was clear the jury was leaning toward a conviction. As the trial neared its end, I found myself reflecting on how far we had come. The past year had been a whirlwind of betrayal, heartbreak, and resilience. Through it all, Emma, Jake, and I had found strength in each other. We had built a new foundation, one that couldn't be shaken by the mistakes of the past. Then came the verdict. On a grey Friday afternoon, the jury delivered its decision. Michael Reed was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a punishment that felt both justified and surreal. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. But the story wasn't over yet. Danielle's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week, and the outcome would determine the next chapter of her life and ours. She had cooperated fully with the investigation, but her involvement in Michael's crimes couldn't be ignored. The judge would have to weigh her remorse against her responsibility. On the day of the hearing, I made the difficult decision to attend. I wasn't sure what I hoped to gain from being there, but a part of me felt it was important to see this through. The courtroom was smaller and quieter than I had expected. Danielle sat at the defendant's table, looking pale but composed. When it was her turn to speak, she stood and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I made mistakes that hurt my family, my community, and myself. I was blinded by ambition and led astray by someone I trusted. But that doesn't absolve me of my choices. I take full responsibility for my actions, and I'm prepared to face the consequences. All I ask is for the chance to rebuild my life and prove to my children that I can be better." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then the judge nodded, his expression stern, but not unkind. "Ms. Carter," he said, "your cooperation with the investigation has been noted and will be taken into account. However, your actions contributed to a significant breach of trust and caused harm to many. I believe you understand the gravity of your choices, and I hope this serves as an opportunity for growth and redemption." The judge sentenced Danielle to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. It was a lighter sentence than I had expected, but it felt fair. As she was led away, she glanced back at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and gratitude. I nodded, acknowledging her unspoken apology. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Without the shadow of the trial hanging over us, Emma and Jake seemed lighter, more at ease. We continued to focus on the small joys of everyday life: family dinners, movie nights, and the occasional impromptu dance party in the living room. As for me, I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The journey had been painful, but it had also taught me the importance of resilience, forgiveness, and the power of starting over. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them, one step at a time. If this story has moved you or reminded you of your own strength in the face of adversity, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, redemption, and hope. Your support means the world to me, and together we can continue to find light in even the darkest of times. Life after the storm wasn't perfect, but it was mine. With Michael behind bars and Danielle serving her sentence, the chaos that had consumed my world finally began to settle. But closure isn't an overnight process. It's a journey, one filled with lessons and small victories. Emma and Jake became my guiding lights during this time. Emma poured herself into her art, her pieces becoming more vibrant and expressive with each passing day. One afternoon, she came to me with a new painting, a serene family portrait of the three of us, standing on a beach under a radiant sunset. When I asked her why she chose that setting, she smiled and said, "Because it feels peaceful, like us now." Jake, ever the builder, decided he wanted to create a model of our house out of Legos. We spent an entire weekend piecing it together, laughing as we struggled to make the roof stay in place. When it was finally finished, he looked at it proudly and said, "See, Dad, even when things break, you can put them back together." Their resilience amazed me, and it reminded me that while the past couldn't be erased, it could be a foundation for something better. I also learned to embrace forgiveness. Not for Danielle's sake, but for my own anger and resentment had fueled me through the hardest days. But as time passed, I realized they were weights I no longer needed to carry. Danielle had made her mistakes, but she was making an effort to change. She wrote letters to Emma and Jake regularly, sharing her thoughts and promising to do better. And while her relationship with them would always be a work in progress, I could see the sincerity in her words. One day, Emma asked if we could visit her mum. I hesitated, unsure of whether it was the right time, but ultimately decided it was a step we needed to take together. The visit was emotional, but healing Danielle hugged them tightly, tears streaming down her face as she apologized for everything. Seeing her vulnerability reminded me that even broken people can find redemption. As for me, I found a new sense of purpose. Teaching had always been a job I loved, but after everything I'd been through, it took on a deeper meaning. I began incorporating lessons about resilience, empathy, and the power of community into my classes. Sharing my story with my students, in a way that felt appropriate, became a way to inspire them, and myself. I also reconnected with old friends and allowed myself to embrace new experiences. One of the most surprising changes came when I joined a local support group for single parents. What started as a reluctant attempt to get out there turned into a source of genuine connection. Listening to others' stories reminded me that I wasn't alone in my struggles, and sharing my own experiences gave me a sense of strength I didn't know I had. Then, there was Sarah. My sharp, no-nonsense lawyer had been a pillar of support throughout the custody battle and trial. After everything was over, we kept in touch, often meeting for coffee to talk about life beyond the courtroom. Over time, those conversations became something more. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, far from it. We were both cautious, aware of the scars we carried, but what started as friendship grew into something steady and meaningful. Sarah became a source of warmth and laughter, someone who reminded me that it was okay to open my heart again. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch watching Emma and Jake play in the yard, Sarah turned to me and said, "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, you know." I smiled, squeezing her hand. I think we all are. Danielle's parole hearing came sooner than expected. Emma and Jake wrote letters to the board, expressing their hope that she would be given a chance to prove herself. I supported their decision. Knowing it was important for them to have a voice in the process, Danielle was granted parole after 18 months. And while her return to life outside wasn't without its challenges, she approached it with determination. She moved into a small apartment nearby and began working at a local nonprofit. Her focus was on rebuilding her relationship with Emma and Jake, and she made a genuine effort to show up for them in ways she hadn't before. While our relationship remained cordial at best, I found a sense of peace in knowing she was trying to make amends. As time went on, the wounds of the past began to fade. They didn't disappear entirely. Some scars never do. But they became a part of our story, reminders of how far we'd come. Emma and Jake continued to thrive, their laughter filling our home with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Jake asked, "Dad, do you think our family is okay now?" I looked at him, then at Emma, and smiled. "I think our family is strong, Jake. We've been through a lot, but we're still standing, and as long as we have each other, we'll be okay." The final chapter of this journey isn't about triumph or perfection. It's about resilience. It's about finding the strength to keep going, even when the road is rough. It's about learning to let go of anger, to embrace forgiveness, and to build something new out of the ashes of what was lost. If this story has resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's hope. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, redemption, and the power of the human spirit. Thank you for joining me on this journey, Until next time. This concludes the story. Let me know when you're ready for the 8th step, or if there's anything you'd like to add.